Hi again, in this lesson we'll talk about one of the main and the easiest way to start your attack, which is the way to create and exploit weaknesses in the opponent's position. As we discussed earlier, one of the main ways to attack is to move your pieces forward to an opponent's half of the board and take or attack something there. But there's a problem here. Usually, the vast majority of the squares in opponent's half of the board are covered by his pieces. Therefore, how can you do this? Well, you need to find those holes which you can utilize to penetrate into the opponent's position, which are pawns and squares which are not protected by other pawns. And we usually talk about the 6th and 5th rank when it comes to black position. For white it would be the 4th and the 3rd rank. But if we're playing white, so we pay attention to the 6th and the 5th rank. If you can notice there, some pawns or squares which are not protected by other pawns of an opponent, it means that your piece can be located there, and it's probably a good thing to do. For instance, if we would focus on the king side alone, you may notice those holes like h6 square and f6 square. An additional advantage of white here is that there is that pawn on g5 that controls those squares, and therefore if white would be able to put his piece there, it would not only be able to be located there temporarily, but even more so, it will be able to stay there for a long time and contribute to the white's attack long term. And that was the thing that white could have done in this position. He could have and should have played knight to e4, aiming to place this knight onto f6, which would create a very strong attack in conjunction with the white's queen, which may go forward to c3 to further attack the black's king. And actually it would just win the game. Imagine black takes the pawn, for instance knight takes b2, white can go knight f6 check, and now in case king goes to g7, white can just continue with queen to c3, and the queen takes aim at the black's king, and black has no defense against a discovered check, followed by the checkmate. So that's how powerful usage of weak squares is. It allows you to bring your piece right inside of the opponent's camp, close to his pieces, pawns and king, and it can create a massive attacking effect there. Anyway, let me continue the line. Let's say black captures the rook. Can you see the checkmate for white here? White just needs to jump with his knight from f6 somewhere to create the double check, which could be knight e8 or knight h5. Actually, both ways work. Let's say knight takes h5. Now black's king is under the check from the knight and the queen, therefore it has to move somewhere, and white would just play queen to g7 checkmate. So that's the way white can checkmate here, and there was another sideline which is also fairly cool. Let me just take a few steps back. Right in this position where black moved the king to g7, there was another alternative. Black could possibly move his king to h8. And in this case, there is another way to win for white, which is also fairly cool. It's the move queen takes g6. Boom. All of a sudden, white sacrifices the whole queen. And the idea is that after the queen is accepted, white can deliver this nice checkmate rook to h7. It might be, the great final or great finish for this game, and as you can see, once again, this knight from f6 plays the decisive role in the white's attack. Alright, so that's been the idea, that in order to start an attack, you need to bring pieces into the opponent's position, into his half of the board, and in order to do so, you need to pay attention to the opponent's weak squares, which you can use to penetrate into the opponent's camp. Let's see how it works in some other examples. Here's the next example, the game between Bengiev and Panzer. It's white to play here, and you may think about this for a moment. How would you play here as white? Here we can see that white is certainly ahead in development. He has developed all of his pieces already and even began some pawn assault on the king side, while black still needs to finalize the development of his pieces and especially to hide his king. But the problem here is, how can white begin his attack? We know that we need to move forward, hopefully to opponent's half of the board. But we can't do this with our pieces right away because all the squares in opponent's half of the board are covered by his pawns. And therefore we need to create some weaknesses first. And that's why white played pawn to f5. Of course, it also helps white potentially to open up the lines, which is another rule of attack which we already know. And black actually favored white. He played pawn takes f5, which somewhat helps white to open up more lines. Black should have probably played pawn to e5, trying to keep the position closed. You just can see that people don't really understand these rules of attack very well. When you attack, you try to open the lines. When you defend, you should keep them closed. But anyway, after that, white nevertheless contains, white has some great ideas how to continue his attack. Now he has this new weak square d5, which he can use to jump with his knight forward, and from there the knight can possibly attack something. The other knight from b3 also can jump forward to another weak square a5, and also put some pressure onto black's position. Therefore, the black's position would still be uncomfortable, but at least he's still in the game. Anyway, in the actual game, he took that pawn on f5, and white straight away played knight to d5. White could have also captured the pawn by the knight, that would also be fine, but here white creates the threat of knight to c7 check, which is a very strong threat, and therefore white went for this more powerful idea. Black played rook c8 to protect the c7 square, white traded off the rooks, and he took this pawn back, knight takes f5. And now you can see this kind of ideal situation for white, where his both knights are located on these strong squares. It is also called an outpost square when the certain piece, such as knight, is standing on an open or semi-open file into the opponent's half of the board, and it is protected by your pawn, such as in this case this knight on f5. This kind of an outpost is an extremely strong thing, because once again it's gonna stay there for a long time. It's not that easy for opponent to somehow exchange it or push back this knight. And at the same time, because the knight is situated in opponent's half of the board, it does create a lot of potential threats there around the opponent's wide range of squares. In the game, black played pawn to h6. I don't really know why. White played queen to f2, taking aim at the black's f7 square. Black traded one of the knights, but the white's position is still strong. He played g6, trying to push the other knight away. But here there are a lot of ways for white to win. He played bishop d4, which is winning. I guess even more straightforward way would be to jump with the knight to g7, because it allows white to use this battery right away. And then let's say bishop takes, queen takes f7 check, king d8 is forced, queen takes g7, and white is winning. He's attacking the rook. He can also there, even capture the pawn and promote his new queen if he wish to do so. Here everything is just too good for white, and the black's king cannot escape to the queen side because white also can attack it from there, from the c1 line as well. There are just too many threats for the black to survive here. In this example, we have seen how white cleverly created weaknesses first and then occupied those weaknesses by his knights, and that was the way for him to start going into opponent's half of the board, using those weaknesses, and for white using the outpost, which provides you this strong position for one of your pieces. This is the game between Bogolyubov and Botvinnik, two famous players of the past. It is black to play currently. Can you notice any weak squares in the white's position? We need to focus our attention on the third and the fourth rank and ask ourselves what are the pawns or squares which are not protected by other pawns. And if you think about this, you can see a number of them. There is the square on a3, b4, the c3 knight, possibly those d3 bishop, but it's probably hard to attack it. The d4 pawn is possibly weak, and the e4 square. As you can see, there are a lot of weaknesses out there that black may use sooner or later. Of course, it's most important to try to occupy weak squares in the center if possible, because it will have the greatest effect. And that's what black did right away by playing knight to e4. He places the knight on the white's weak square, which is simultaneously black's strong square for the knight, and it already starts creating some little threats, like it attacks that knight on c3. Of course, white can protect the knight very easily, but that's the point of initiative. When you start creating some little threats, and even though your opponent certainly can defend, anyway, you start leading the game, you start putting the pressure, and in the future you will be able to develop a more significant attack. White played rook c1 to protect the knight. Black finalized his development, played knight to d7, queen e2, rook c8. Right now just both players finalized his development. White played rook d1, and here Black played another typical move, pawn to f5. This is a very useful structure to remember. When you have that knight in the center, supported by the two pawns on d5 and f5, it makes this knight on e4 extremely powerful, because there is certainly no easy way for white to get rid of that knight. And even if white takes the knight, it helps you to move one of your pawns forward, which would also create some problems for white, and simultaneously it will help you gain more space and will open up more lines for your pieces. In the game, white plays bishop f4, and now using this strong knight on e4, this outpost, black decided to start an attack on the king side. He played pawn to g5. Usually, moving the pawns of your castling is a very dangerous idea because it can possibly expose your king. But it is fine to do that if you have a strong position in the center. It's one of the classics of the chess strategy that if you have a strong position in the center, it usually means that you will be safe on the flanks as well. And that's exactly what happens right here. Due to this strong knight on e4 supported by the black's pawn chain in the center, black may and even should start his attack on the king side because there is no way for white's pieces to go forward. This knight just dominates over everything. White played bishop e5, black continued pawn to g4, white played knight e1. We have seen also this idea in the past. When you move your g-pawn forward, it helps you to kick away that knight from f3, which is usually one of the main defenders of opponent's king. Here black took the bishop. It was a white's powerful piece. And here there was a really cool variation, like in case white recaptures, which is like the most natural thing to do, black all of a sudden can start, the straightforward attack. Even though it may seem for a moment that, black has not many pieces close to the white's position apart from this knight, but nevertheless, black's position is so powerful that he can already play knight takes f2, eliminate one of the pawns of the white's castling, and begin his attack. What's the idea? If white takes with the queen, then everything is pretty simple. Black would reply bishop takes c5, winning the queen due to the pin. Well, that is certainly winning for black. That's a very easy line. A more complex line is taking this knight by the king. In this case, black still plays bishop c5, so certainly black would like to take advantage of the fact that the white's king is exposed now. And after white plays king to f1, which is like the only logical move, black plays queen g5, bringing the queen into the attack. We discussed earlier that it's always a good idea to bring your queen into the attack. It can actually deliver a checkmate. And now the black's idea is to play queen f4, attacking the king. The opponent's king is already under the fire of both of the black's bishops potentially, and now black is also bringing the queen, and therefore this attack is already so strong. In fact, white has no defense. If white plays knight to c2 to provide this sort of escape path for the king, there are actually a bunch of things black can do, and there are several winning continuations. And the one that I like the most, I think like the most active one, is to keep pushing the pawns forward to open up more lines, following this principle of attack that first of all you attack by your every move, and secondly that you try to open up more lines. Black can here play pawn to g3, trying to destroy the position further of the white's pawns around the white's king, and if he takes, black instead of recapturing can play f4. Black does not want to take the pawn right away because he also wants to bring his rook into the attack. And now almost all of the black's pieces are taking part in the party, and white is certainly defenseless. If he tries g4 to keep the lines closed, black can push first of all this pawn forward to f3, and after a pawn is taken, black can continue with queen takes g4. The pawn is pinned, and now really all of the blacks have the pieces are taking part into the attack. Black is threatening queen g1 checkmate, rook takes f3 is also coming. So yeah, white is really absolutely defenseless here. In this game, we have seen how black had the strong knight on e4 a few moves ago, and how it dominated over the entire situation. Let me just show that position once again for a moment. I'll take a few moves back, and let's look at this position. Thanks to this so strong, monstrous knight on e4, black managed to dominate. And that's the very useful thing to remember. If you can have this kind of an outpost, if you can put your piece on a weak square in opponent's camp, which is at the same time protected by your pawn, it gives you a super strong position long term. And that's one of the ways to begin your attack, because you can penetrate into the opponent's position without any sacrifices, just by putting your piece on a strong square.